Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Lo-Fi Travel. Today, we are talking about Kbal Spean, Cambodia, the river of a thousand lingas. This video is everything you need to know and everything you want to know about the place. Yes, the practicalities, but also every myth, every legend about the carvings you can see and the carvings you can't. I apologize in advance for horrible pronunciation. I do not read, write, or speak Khmer, Sanskrit, or Thai, which is briefly mentioned in this video. Likewise, I apologize if any pictures of any writing are upside down, sideways. I truly do not know the difference. Similarly, regarding the Hindu, Buddhist, and Khmer mythological explanations for the carvings here, I am not a subject matter expert. I am not an academic in this field, but I have taken great care to only read, reference, and cross-reference the published academic work of experts in this field and on this site, whom I've linked to in the description box below. On the rare occasion, I reference Wikipedia or similar just to make a very general explanation of a concept. I mention that and link that as well. If there are any well-informed corrections or additions you'd like to make, by all means, tell us in the comments below. I'm simply a tourist who cares about context, desiring to give you, the audience, a preparation for and understanding of the Kbal Spean site. I unfortunately did not have or receive from my very kind, seemingly well-educated, quite experienced, fully licensed and certified guide. We're just going above and beyond here. As per usual with my longer videos, timestamps are in the description box below. Kbal Spean, Cambodia. Back in Siem Reap after 2.5 years, I've found myself reviewing all my old photos and videos to see what I missed and what I'd like to revisit. The first time I was at Angkor and its surrounds, it was genuinely overwhelming. There was so much to see and understand, all of it, of course, totally foreign to me. Looking back through my snapshots, I'm reminded daily that I indeed have forgotten more interesting places than most people have ever been. That's not a humble brag, it's a disappointment. I wish my mind was a highlight reel of all the amazing things I've experienced, rather than a checklist of daily necessities, as I'm sure most of ours are. I really struggled with how to format this video slash blog post. No one reads my blog, but if you want to, I've linked it below. But I settled on an FAQ. Is it far from town? What transportation do I need? My first visit to Kbal Spean is a perfect example of the unfortunate phenomenon mentioned. I vaguely remembered it being a bit of a hike, that's all. Upon looking into it, the Kulen Hills are 60 kilometers from Siem Reap proper, 30 kilometers slightly northeast of Angkor, in Phnom Kulen National Park. This is a screenshot from Google Maps. I think it shows pretty clearly how far away from town the site actually is. Ban Tie Shrey is about the halfway point between Angkor and Kbal Spean. And this is a topographical map published by FAO in 1975, right before Pol Pot came into power, which is still accurate. I remember it as a long ride on mostly good, but some sort of rough dirt roads, which we definitely did in a remorque, not a car. Motorcycles would work too. There's a parking lot 2 kilometers from the site. I recommend you prepare your victuals before you go, water, snacks, etc. Pack them in a cooler before leaving town. You can definitely get some fruit and something grilled from roadside sellers on the way there, but there's no one selling drinks anywhere near the national park, and you will definitely need water. Is the hike long and/or difficult? It's an intermediate level 45 to 60-minute hike. It is not handicap friendly. Though the trail is only 2 kilometers, it's entirely uphill on slippery and rocky terrain through the forest. I only seem to have taken 2 photos of the whole walk, one from a clearing where I could finally get a view of the surrounding hills, and one of what I think, I could be wrong, is the biggest tamarind I've ever seen, open and desiccated. Just by this spot, there's a rickety wooden staircase that brings you down beneath a small waterfall. When should I visit? This is probably the most important question, Starting in December, after the southwest monsoon season ends and the water starts dropping, the carvings become visible in a 150-meter stretch of riverbed. So, the best time to visit is between January and April. As it gets drier and drier, more carvings are visible. I went in November, and looking back, it's unclear to me how much I was unable to see. I definitely saw things partially submerged in water that were hard to photograph. Speaking of the water, it is relatively safe to go in the water. You are allowed to at some parts and not others. The weather is obviously incredibly hot, so most tour guides invite you to where appropriate. Though I'd probably save it for the much bigger, less sacred Kulen waterfall. The fall pool is shallow and you can walk along the carved riverbed, but it is very rocky and the water was running quickly when I went in November. So use common sense and wear hiking sandals or swim shoes. It's an odd mix of visitors, big tour groups, local kids, bikini clad Europeans, Hindu pilgrims. There are no rules per se. How old is it and who built it? Researchers believe that the very first lingas were carved on this site in the late 800s, but the thousand lingas were commissioned and carved in 1054 under King Suryavarman I of the Khmer Empire, who ruled from 1006 to 1050, and continuing under his successor, King Udayadityavarman II, who ruled from 1050 to 1066. We know that because of descriptions on the site deciphered by Claude Jacques. Incredibly, though he first became aware of the inscriptions in spring 1968 and started deciphering them via Jean Boubet's rubbings and photographs, he was not able to actually finish the job and publish his paper until 1999 because he could not go back to Cambodia until Pol Pot was dead. On screen is the text that identifies Suryavarman I's minister as the patron of the mendicants. Linked in my description box below is his paper, with many more rubbings and photographs. There are far fewer, but some, additional carvings believed to be from around the 13th and perhaps early 14th century, after Theravada Buddhism became the national religion. We can't be absolutely certain of the dates because by this point the Khmer Empire was in severe decline and temple epigraphy had become very rare. On screen is a picture of such a carving from the Smithsonian. I personally did not notice or photograph this one when I was there. One way I keep foreign histories straight is by anchoring them to the history I learned as a child, comparing people and events with what was happening in either the UK or US at the time because I'm an American. To wit, in 1006, when King Suryavarman I took the throne, Ethelred the Unready was paying 48,000 pounds of silver per annum Danegeld to Vikings living in London. In 1050, when King Udayadityavarman II took over, Edward the Confessor, the next to last Anglo-Saxon king, was on the throne. And of course, when King Udayadityavarman II passed away in 1066, William the Conqueror took over in England. Just for comparison's sake, I thought it would be fun. To the left, we have a stone bas-relief from Bapuan Temple circa 1060, and on the right, a similar stone bas-relief from Chichester Cathedral 20 years later, circa 1080. When the later Buddhist carvings were added here, England wasn't doing so great either. It was the time of the three Edwards, Longshanks, aka the Hammer of the Scots, his son who lost Scotland at the Battle of Bannockburn, and his son who started the Hundred Years' War. And while all this was going on, England experienced the Great Famine, the Black Death, and the Peasants' Revolt. What religion is it? King Suryavarman I and King Udayadityavarman II were both Buddhist converts, but at the time, the majority of Khmers were Hindu, and they did practice both. At that time, Buddhism wasn't recognized as a wholly different religion from Hinduism. Indeed, for hundreds of years in Cambodia, Buddha was considered another divine sage. This statue, held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, actually dates all the way back to the late 5th or early 6th century. Both kings built and authorized others to build Hindu, Buddhist, and half monuments. Kbal Spean is a Hindu site. primarily devoted to Shiva, but also depicting Vishnu, Brahma, Lakshmi, Rama, and Hanuman, as well as symbolic animals, including cows and frogs. The 1,000 lingas were carved during Suryavarman I's reign by hermits patronized by one of his ministers. Most of the figural carvings, and of course additional lingas, were carved during Udayaditya Varman II's reign. Inscriptions on the site also tell us Udayaditya Varman II personally consecrated a gold lingam here in 1059. It's no longer here, but this is the spot where Jean Bouvet believed it once was. For reference, if you're curious about what a Khmer gold lingam of the era looks like, these are 4 sold by Sotheby's Hong Kong in 2022, all dated roughly between the 7th and 12th centuries. So perhaps what was here looked something like this. Maybe it was one of these. You never know. What does Kbal Spean mean? Kbal Spean means bridgehead in Khmer. The bridge part of the name is obvious. A block of natural rock spans the stream, and the heavily carved 1,000 lingas resemble a cobblestone road. Here's a picture of the bridge, if you will. You can easily see the 1,000 lingas and some linga-yonis. Of course, over the centuries, as Khmer converted from Hinduism to Buddhism, they held and do still hold syncretic beliefs, but started interpreting the meaning of these carvings as originating in Buddhism rather than Hinduism. To quote Jean Bouvet, the ethnologist who discovered this site, quote, "For some elders, this bridge was built a very long time ago, when only the summit of Phnom Kulen emerged, like an island in the invading ocean. For the torrential waters to flow back and clear the Cambodian territory, the Buddha had to reach this island and make the waves recede. The decorated and adorned bridge is the only vestige of the great journey that led the steps of the sage from crest to crest, over passes and waterways, to the sacred mountain where he left his venerated mark. From there, he assigned the shores of present-day Cambodia as the limit of the ocean." End quote. And what of the linga-yonis? How are those related to Buddhism? In Hinduism, to quote the venerable Wikipedia, quote, "The lingam of the Shaivism tradition is a short cylindrical pillar-like symbol of Shiva. It is often represented within a disc-shaped platform. The yoni, its feminine counterpart, consists of a flat element, horizontal compared to the vertical lingam, and is designed to allow liquid offerings to drain away for collection." End quote. So a lingam is phallic, a yoni is yonic, and their presence together symbolizes fertility, prosperity, and continuity. But for the Buddhists, the 5 lingas in the yoni, like this, can also reference the eggs of the queen of the mythical white crows. To quote Vittorio Roveda, who in turn is paraphrasing Donald Swearer, quote, "In a former time, at the beginning of the first kappa, a white crow mother nested in a tree on the bank of the river Ganges. She carefully attended her 5 eggs, the future 5 bodhisattvas. After 5 days of brooding, she had to search for food and left the nest. A severe storm developed, uprooting the tree that fell into the raging river, dispersing the eggs. When the mother crow flew back and did not find the eggs, she was distraught, died broken-hearted, and ascended to the Mahabrahma heaven. The eggs were swept into the Ganges. The egg, with cooked santo, was found by the queen of chickens, who took it with her own eggs. At the same time, Naggamano's egg was found by a serpent, Naga, Kasapo's egg by a mother turtle, and Samana-Gautam, the historic or current Buddha, by the queen of the cows. The 5th egg of Sri Arya Matea was discovered by a tigress. All the eggs hatched on the same day, at the same time, just in different places. Each foster mother nurtured their adopted child with love. And after 12 years, the bodhisattvas reunited and decided to become hermits. They left their parent, promising to remember the family name and lineage when attaining enlightenment. Each of the 5 went into the forest to practice asceticism and meditation. One day, it happened that the 5 found themselves under the same beautiful Negrota tree and discovered that they had the same father and mother, the white crow, being thus brothers. They expressed their determination to follow asceticism till reaching the enlightenment. At that time, their white crow mother descended from heaven with beautiful full wings.
The five bodhisattvas rejoiced to be reunited and agreed to honor their mother and compassion by making a replica of her footprints. She agreed and gave them strands of cotton twisted in the shape of a crow's foot to make a votive lamp to use for puja until they reached enlightenment. Later, they made the vow to come regularly to the Negrota tree and construct a special place to enshrine the relics. They returned to the forest, performing puja with the offering of lamps whose wicks were made in the shape of a crow's foot. The first to attain enlightenment was Kuksanto, followed by Nagkamano, Kasapo, and Samanagota. The fifth Buddha will be reborn as Sri Ariyamataya, for whom the four had agreed to build a very large reliquary so that humans can pay respect to relics by worshipping physically or in their mind, end quote. And to quote Roveda's explanation of why this tale is particularly significant in Cambodia, quote, the importance of Maitreya, the final and future Kappa Buddha, in Cambodian Buddhism is paramount. Already in the 16th century, 1578, as attested by an inscription in Angkor Wat's uppermost sanctuary, the Queen Mother, mother of King Brahsata, after having donated and consecrated images of the Buddha, made the vow to be reborn in the time of Maitreya, who will lead her to nirvana. According to a local legend, upon reaching Buddhahood, Maitreya will open the stupa or the mountain where Mahakasyapa in Sanskrit or Mahakasapa in Pali, the Buddha Gautama's disciple, is awaiting his arrival, meditating upon the robe he took from the Gautama, which he will offer to Maitreya, the new teacher. With the arrival of Maitreya, Buddhism will flourish once more before the ultimate dissolution. Therefore, it is important for Cambodians to make their offering with the wish to be reborn at the time of Maitreya, at whose side they will follow the path to nirvana. Though exceptions exist, like the example shown on screen, in later Cambodian Buddhist art, Maitreya is always centered among the other four Buddhas as if they were part of a mandala. So he would be the central lingam for the same nest. For the totally naive, the lingas can also represent coconuts, what Bulbe calls, quote, the elementary religious offering in the region to the spirits of origin, Khmer animist gods called Gru, who closely monitor the lives of men from birth. End quote. The origin of Kbal is less clear. The obvious interpretation is that the bridge is at the source of the river, just as we say headwater in English. However, there is a strong alternate theory. Kapala is the Sanskrit word for skull, or more specifically, a ritual skull cup. Further, the kapalika, or skullmen, skull bearers, are a now extinct but once widespread monastic order of ascetic, tantric, non-Puranic Shivists who use human skulls as begging bowls. Though not incredibly well attested, their popularity seems to have been at its height when Kbal Spean was carved. Here on the left, we have an Agori mendicant pictured in the late 19th century. Agoris are the sole remaining Shaivist Hindu sect still using human skulls in their religious rituals. On the right, we have a picture from the present era, I believe taken in the 90s. To wit, in Act 3 of a popular Sanskrit play of the time, Prabodha Chandrodaya, or Rise of the Moon of Intellect, by Sri Krishna Mishra, a male Kapalika ascetic and his consort, a female Kapalini, disrupt a dispute on the quote-unquote true religion between a mendicant Buddhist wanderer and a Jain Digambara monk, with both ending up convinced by the Kapalika couple to give up their vows of celibacy and renunciation by drinking red wine and indulging in sensual pleasure with women. In the end, both the Buddhist and Jain reject their former religions and convert to Shaivism, having embraced Shiva Bhairava as the supreme god along with his wife Parvati. On screen here is a 16th century Nepalese copy of Rise of the Moon of Intellect held at the British Library. So this text was read and reread and recopied and venerated for a long time by both Hindus and Buddhists. From the 8th through 15th centuries, most Khmers were devaraja called Shaivite Hindus, the national god being Shiva Bhairashvara. So, what's the link between bhareshvara and bhairava? Bhareshvara is a highly venerated phallic image associated with Lord Shiva. This depiction holds significant religious importance, symbolizing the divine attributes of Shiva and his role in the spiritual practices of worshippers. The 1,000 lingas of this riverbed are Shiva Bhareshvara. The sexual leniency of the kapalikas, though widely despised by other Hindu sects, may have been perceived neutrally or even favorably in Cambodia. On screen here is a painting from a 17th century manuscript, circa 1630 to 1635, held by the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. It depicts the tantric goddess Bhairavi and her consort Shiva as kapalika ascetics sitting in a charnel ground. Further, the Cambodian devaraja type of Shaivism emphasizes god-king worship. Bhairava, as the fearsome aspect of Shiva, produced just from the anger channeled in a furrowed brow, cut off Brahma's fifth head, killing him temporarily to punish Brahma's deceit and arrogance in declaring himself the supreme creator, thereby challenging Shiva's position as the ultimate reality. Exactly the type of victorious, vengeful, omnipotent, rival-less god king the Khmer kings hoped to be. The image on screen is an early 10th century mahakala bhairava depicted on a chatamurka or four-faced lingam from Bihar, India. But you'll doubtless note its similarity to the four-faced pillars at Tapram Temple, built over 200 years later by Jayavarman VII and dedicated to his father, who was overthrown by a Mandarin whom Jayavarman VII later had assassinated and likewise usurped. On screen here, to quote Philip Coggan, are 600 years of Khmer kings disguised as gods from the 6th through 14th centuries. Quote, all were done during the lifetime of the king. They represent the king as devaraja, god king, so that the king could be represented as Shiva, the god with a third eye in the middle of the forehead, in a statue in a Shivite temple, Vishnu, the one with 4 arms, in another temple, and as Buddha in Buddhist temples. Devaraja statues had 2 purposes: to identify the king as the legitimate source of power derived from the god, and through copies set up in temples throughout the kingdom to mark his domains. Hence, the need for recognizable portraits. They were identifying individual kings. If the kingdom fractured, as it sometimes did, rival claimants to the throne would set up their own statues, but these would be destroyed when the kingdom was reunified. The Devaraja cult lives on today. The king is still considered an incarnation of the god Vishnu, which accounts for the popularity of the Vishnu shrine on the riverfront in front of the royal palace in Phnom Penh. End quote. On screen is the image inside the shrine on the Phnom Penh riverfront. The shrine custodians will swear up and down that it's Vishnu, but it's not. It's a mahakala, the fierce, wrathful defender of the 8 directions of the universe in Hinduism and Buddhism. In Sanskrit, mahakal means great, time, or death, and in Hinduism, it primarily refers to Lord Shiva, the conqueror of time and death, Mahakala Bhairava being the terribly fearsome form, the aspect that is so fierce it is beyond fear, a punisher of sinners. And that's the difference between a king and a dynasty. A king temporarily creates the ultimate reality. A dynasty is ultimate power beyond the limitations of time and mortality. This, however, is a Buddhist depiction, we can tell because it has 6 arms. Occasionally, a Hindu bhairava is depicted with 6 arms, but it's usually 4 or 10. And before the 14th century, particularly in syncretic Hindu Buddhist temples, Buddhist mahakalas were depicted with 4 arms. Only later did just 2 or 6 become the standard. The 6-armed mahakala is related to the story of Avalokiteshvara, the Buddha of compassion, which broke into thousands of pieces looking at the miseries and sorrows of humans on earth. Amitabha Buddha decided to bring her back in one piece, but all he could do was bring her back with hundreds of heads and thousands of arms.
The idea being that it takes a lot of heads and a lot of hands to assist humans in overcoming their misery and suffering. You'll notice in his or her uppermost right hand is a necklace of skulls. This is a reproduction from 1991. The Khmer Rouge destroyed the original 11th or 12th century statue that was the personal property of King Norodom, brought to Phnom Penh in 1866. Needless to say, a priceless artifact that may have belonged personally to one of the kings of Angkor, perhaps even Suryavarman I or Udayaditya Varman II, that by depicting Mahakala in the Buddhist manner symbolized at least an attempted transition or aspiration to or pretense of enlightened rule. Additionally, in the Mahayana Buddhism of the time, which is what Suryavarman I and Udayaditya Varman II would have been exposed or partially converted to, not the Theravada Buddhism that swept Cambodia 300 years later and remains the country's main religion today, bhairava had been adopted as a deity, as the fierce protector of the Dharma. In Tibetan Buddhism, which is the most similar to the ancient form of Mahayana Buddhism the Khmer kings of this era would have been exposed to, the various Buddhist forms of bhairava have their own set of tantras that were supposedly revealed in the 10th century. So, right before Kbal Spean was built. In other words, all of this was a very hot topic in theology at the time. And that's where this widespread confusion between Vishnu and Shiva arises. Over the centuries, the national god of Cambodia has gone from a wrathful Hindu Shiva to the once and future Buddha of ultimate attainment. According to Jean Bobet, for the hermits of the Gru Tep Me school who lived at Kbal Spean, the god Vishnu, often represented as the greatest of hermits, was a form of Buddha, for whom skulls and four-faced depictions are very relevant. Quote, resting on the polycephalic naga, the great hermit has blocked his vital breath at the top of the skull at the fontanelle, preventing it from descending towards the other openings of the body. He can then project his spirit out of himself, a spirit that has become perfectly lucid and capable of apprehending the essence of things in the four horizons at the same time. This projection is the four-faced figure, the representation of Brahma being born on a lotus. In other words, for the guru of this school, the perfection towards which they all strive, end quote. Notably, in the Mahayana Buddhism of that time, skullcups were also tantric ritual implements used to hold bread and wine, symbolizing flesh and blood when making offerings to wrathful deities. Presently, such skullcups remain in use only in Tibet and Nepal. On screen is just one example of an 18th or 19th century Tibetan skullcup held at the Walters Art Museum. To quote their explanation of the object, quote, this ritual vessel, made from the upper section of a human skull, belongs to the tantric Buddhist traditions of Tibet and neighboring regions. The skull serves as a reminder of death and impermanence, and it symbolizes wisdom and emptiness, the true nature of reality according to Buddhist teachings. In practice, such skull cups are used to prepare and contain a sacred liquid, usually tea mixed with dissolved herbs, which is consecrated as the nectar of enlightened bliss, then consumed or used to sanctify ritual offerings. The imagery on the metal cover and stand of this skull cup relates to the mental imagery visualized by the practitioner as he or she prepares the nectar. The skull sits above a triangular fire, the corners of which are marked by 3 human heads. In the visualization, their colors correspond to 3 mental states that immediately precede the light of pure mental clarity: white, luminosity; red, radiance; and blue-black, near attainment. Within the skull, the practitioner visualizes 5 bodily substances and 5 types of meat, which are purified through the heat of the fire, then transformed into nectar when combined with the substance of a tantric staff, which melts into the skull cup from above. Each element of the visualization appears first as a sacred syllable before morphing into its respective object.
The letters of some of these syllables appear on the lid, interspersed with deities. End quote. So, what do the tantric staffs that go along with the skull cups in this ritual look like? In both Shaivite Hinduism and this form of Buddhism, they are tridents. And though you can't see them in my photo because water was flowing over them, in this photo from the Smithsonian taken during a drier month, we clearly see three ascetics bearing tridents, followed by a fourth bearing what the Smithsonian calls a water pot, but may very well be a ritual skull cup. Obviously, the carving is too eroded to tell. There may be additional significance in there being three trident bearers here. In Hindu and Buddhist cosmology, Mount Meru is the place where the three realms, earth, atmosphere, and sky, meet, and the different planes of existence for each, the spirit, mortal, and demon realms, respectively, intersect. Finally, in this era, it was a status symbol among rulers to sponsor various esoteric gurus to visit, preach, and if liked and admired or required for diplomatic reasons, found monastic orders in sacred places, gifted villages, or populous cities. All this to say that while it is not known, there's a distinct possibility that Kbal refers to the hermits who carved Kbal Spean, being kapalika monks. Clearly Hindu at first, alongside or perhaps gradually replaced by Mahayana Buddhists with similar tantric practices, and only at length, after a few centuries more, Theravada Buddhists. In that sense, Kbal Spean no longer means what it originally meant, and its meaning changes depending on who you ask. A historian, an ethnologist, a Hindu, a Vaishnava, a Shaivite, a Buddhist, a Mahayana, a Theravada, an animist, one of those freaks who posts on YouTube about ancient alien technology for clicks. Let me know in the comments below what your tour guide tells you. On screen here is a late 19th or early 20th century Bhutanese tanka depicting Milarepa, the iconic 11th century Siddha, so contemporaneous with Kbal Spean. Note the skull cups throughout. Wow, that was a long tangent. Next. How is it holy water? The river is considered the Ganges of Khmer mythology and religion. The Kulen Hills it springs from were considered the mountain home of the gods. By flowing over the religious sculptures, the water is blessed before it divides into the Siem Reap and Puak rivers, which feed into Tonle Sap before flowing south, watering Angkor and its moats along the way. The linga-yonis symbolically fertilize the plains of Angkor with holy water flowing to its soil, giving prosperity, the power to grow rice and fish and support a lot of loyal followers and hence rule. As you can see in this picture of the flowing water, there's been unfortunately quite a bit of either theft or perhaps vandalism during the Khmer Rouge era. This was in the heart of Khmer Rouge territory, and also erosion. Comparing pictures of the site taken by Jean Boubet in 1968 with the pictures I took in 2022, it's clear how much is damaged or missing. For example, this upper reclining Vishnu is gone entirely and the lower one is missing its upper half. Here's an overhead shot from the Smithsonian. Maybe you can develop some better theories about what exactly happened here. What should I look for? Well, depending on water level, you may or may not see certain carvings well. My pictures are from November, which is very end of the rainy season. The first sculpture I photographed was Lord Brahma on a lotus flower. In Hinduism, Brahma is the god of creation, knowledge, and the Vedas. Lotus flowers symbolize purity as they rise from the mud to bloom beautifully. Brahma lotus born is a standard Hindu depiction of the god, symbolizing the creation of the universe with a pure and spiritual nature. The second thing I noticed, of course, was the bridge itself, covered with 1,000 lingas. In the foreground in this picture, you can see a linga-yoni, and beyond, a depiction of Lord Vishnu in repose, lying on the serpent god Ananta, with goddess Lakshmi at his feet and Lord Brahma on a lotus petal being born behind. In the fully dry season, this is totally dry. This is a depiction of the Khmer creation myth. The lotus flower emerging from Vishnu's back is actually particular to Khmer art. In other traditions, the lotus grows from his navel. There's Lord Brahma, the divine craftsman who creates the fittings of the world. Vishnu is sleeping on the serpent Ananta on the ocean. This creation myth emphasizes the necessity of undisturbed rule to transform the churning sea into an orderly world. And this stylized scene of the birth of Brahma is actually carved 15 times at Kbal Spean. We have to remember that though it is beautiful and interesting to look at, it's not an art gallery with a lot of variety. Carving this image was merit making for these hermits, and there are so many because once carved, it was believed that the water flowing over them was supercharged with prosperity. Sadly, Lakshmi has been defaced, literally. Here is a matching reclining Vishnu creation carving. You can see on both that Lakshmi's head seems to have been purposefully vandalized. This one also has a carving of Shiva and Uma mounted on Nandi alongside on the right. Like the birth of Rama carving, this is also a stylized depiction that is carved multiple times at Kbal Spean. I noticed it twice, but there may be more. Nandi is the bull. It literally translates to joy or satisfaction and symbolizes virility. Nandi grew up as an ardent devotee of Shiva, and he performed severe penance to become his gatekeeper as well as his mount on the banks of the river Narmada. So there's a little bit of a mythological analogy here. Nandi is also considered the chief guru of the 8 disciples of Nandinata Sampradaya, who were sent in 8 different directions to spread the wisdom of Shaivism. These 8 directions are marked as lingas within yonis in the downstream portion of Kbal Spean. You may be familiar with Preah Temple, the late 9th century Shaivist temple built by Indravarman I in his Khmer capital of Hariharalaya, 9 miles southeast of Simri. The temple takes its name, which means sacred bull, from the statues of bulls at the front of its towers. It's unclear when Preah became a Khmer folk hero beyond the Hindu Nandi, or when the belief arose that in the belly of the bull are precious treasures, or when the story of Brago and Brakai originated. Written versions of tales, including the adventures of these 2 brothers, have been found from as early as the 10th century, so at least a century before Kbal Spean's main construction. According to Boulbet, quote, "Here we do not hesitate about the identity of the characters represented by the sculptor. The sacred bull, Brago, is indeed that of the famous tale, The Sacred Bull and the Crystal Genie," end quote. To hear him tell it, quote, "Born to a very poor couple, the 2 heroes, Prago, the sacred bull, and Brakai, which literally means sacred gem but is usually translated as crystal genie, destined for greatness, remain first in the Khmer land. Having reached adulthood in Afje, editor's note, I have no idea where that is. If you know, please put it in the comments. The crystal genie seduces the youngest daughter of the king of Angkor and takes her with him. They will live thus for a certain time, as sculpted here, the young and beautiful couple on the spine of the bull brother, majestic and powerful. They accomplish various exploits, of which the most famous is to help the Khmer king. Editor's note, I'm taking over here because Boulbet sort of assumes you already know the story. Win 2 contests against the king of Siam. However, they lose the 3rd contest, a bullfight. To quote Wikipedia, quote, "In a final attempt, the king of Siam challenges Brako to a bullfight. A mechanical bull is created by Siamese craftsmen with powers beyond any living animal. Premonitions warn Princess Nyang Pao of the menace. The fight begins, and Brago, seeing his defeat coming, tells Brakai and Yang Peng to hold hands and hold onto his tail as he flies away. Yang Peng loses her grip and falls back to the earth to her death. Lord Indra turns her body to stone and brings her soul to paradise. Rather than become captives of the king of Siam, Brate and Brago fly off to the land of Penonsroy, the Sharp Mountain. End quote. Eventually, the two broken-hearted brothers are captured by the Siamese and kept in a palace prison built for them in Siam.
Historians consider this an etiological tale to explain the loss of the Lavo kingdom, which had been a vassal state from 946 to 1052, to Supanabum, a Siamese city-state.
Also, like the birth of Brahma carving, there's a retroactive non-Hindu explanation for this. The connection to Buddhism is that the ox is also one of the protective animals of Buddha Gautama. Looking upstream, we can see the lingas in profile and from a bird's eye view. In the foreground, you can see a smaller mandala carving. To quote Britannica, quote, in Hindu and Buddhist Tantrism, the mandala is a symbolic diagram used in the performance of sacred rites and as an instrument of meditation. The mandala is basically a representation of the universe, a consecrated area that serves as a receptacle for the gods and as a collection point of universal forces. Man, the microcosm, by mentally entering the mandala and proceeding towards its center, is by analogy guided through the cosmic processes of disintegration and reintegration. So, all of this is about fertility, birth, creationism. This picture is so sad. Obviously, it's been stolen, maybe, or perhaps purposefully blown up. It was a rare carving of Shiva as an ascetic. Bhikshatana murti is an aspect of Shiva as the supreme mendicant or supreme beggar. In Khmer syncretism, Brahmanic mythology, and tales of the life of Buddha and local myths are all intertwined.
By the Angkor period, this aspect of Shiva had already fused with the Khmer folk hero Ta Aesai, a character from the Rimke, the Khmer Rama story dating back to at least the 600s, if not earlier. In the Rimke, Ta Aesai is the medium of mediums, refereeing the fight between the white and black monkey. In modern Buddhist temples, Ta Aesai is usually depicted as a bearded, long-haired hermit wearing a tiger skin, often holding hands with a child or walking as a pilgrim, symbolizing the font of heritable knowledge, a person who has overcome all the worries of the world but has not yet attained enlightenment. This super hermit persona was already developed by the Angkor period. In popular culture, it's believed that Ta Aesai and his hermit disciples could survive dangerous ordeals in the mountains, that their merit was fed by invisible higher beings who recognized their virtue and taught them magical powers, including indestructibility, conjuring, travel in space and time, and omniscience. Interestingly, some deceased hermit monks have actually been credited as being incarnations of Ta Aisai. And in 1872, King Norodom I actually included the legend of Ta Aisai in a new collection of laws to justify them as being of sacred origin.
The crocodile atop the frame, if you will, is actually even more interesting than the figure. According to one legend,
one day, before he was a hermit, the god Ta Aisai left his palace and his wife Sujata
for a 7-day retreat as a hermit in the forest.
Having a little crush on Sujata, King Drap disguised himself as a gecko and perched on Ta Aisai's door frame to eavesdrop as they said their goodbyes. After hearing this spell Ta Aisai used to lock and unlock his palace, King Rap waited as a gecko for 3 days, then recited the spell, unlocked the door, shapeshifted to look like Ta Aisai, and seduced Sujata, saying he decided to come home early. All was well until, as promised, on the 7th day, the real Ta Aisai arrived home. Sujata realized what she had done, committed suicide, and was reborn as Sita, the forever captive wife of King Rap. The forlorn Ta Aisai, of course, heads back into the forest as a hermit.
One particularly interesting thing about this now destroyed carving is that even as Khmers converted en masse from Hinduism to Buddhism, the reverence for hermitism remained. So, hermits, first Hindu, then Buddhist, continued to visit this area and live in this area for weeks, months, years at a time in religious meditation, all the way through the 1950s. And with their changing religious beliefs and education, their interpretation of the carvings also changed. In his 1973 paper, Jean Bobet writes that he actually met the last hermit to live here, who only left in 1962. And that monk told him that, quote, the central character standing under a crocodile represents the Buddha, a perfect sage, who, imperturbable and upright, triumphs over seductions, pitfalls, and insidious questions. End quote. Bulbe also says that when inquiring the locals, the villagers, they thought it could be krai, quote, a hero prince who conquered his princess by fighting over her with a kidnapping crocodile, end quote. This is actually a Thai folktale. To summarize, Cheluan is a crocodile lord who lives in a magic cave under the sea, where, once they swim inside, crocodiles take human form. One day, Cheluan sees a rich man's daughter falls in love and drags her into the cave. Rich Dad offers a reward to any man that can save her. Krai kills Cheluan in epic underwater combat, rescues the girl, and is rewarded with not just her hand in marriage, but also her sister's and a great fortune. Unfortunately, just like Cheluan, he couldn't be contented with his own kind. In the cave, he had spotted one of Cheluan's sexy croc wives and had to have her. So he brought her to live with the two rich girls. They hated her and beat her up until she changed back into croc form and slinked off back to the cave underwater. The end. Apparently, this folktale is actually quite young, only dating back to the late 18th or early 19th century. And even crazier, it was based on a real man who lived in Nonthaburi and literally worked as a crocodile hunter and apparently did save some rich guy's daughter. The temple, real life rich dad, established for him to honor his courageous act is still there today. It's called Wat Bang Krai Nai. Anyway, apparently this folktale has been incredibly popular since then. It was first popularized as a folk opera around 1800, but soon restaged at the Royal Palace, and it was even restaged again in 1970 by Princess Surindorn. I'm talking about the Thai Royal Palace, not the Cambodian Royal Palace. There have been at least 8 just Thai movie versions of this story made between the 1950s and today, including one that came out in 1958 and another in 1972. So, in addition to the princess's restaging for the theater, which was all over the news, maybe it was just top of mind when Bulbe was asking the villagers what they thought. Here, in this really shallow part of the riverbed, is a really large yoni surrounded by lingas, and there are more here. The layout of the yoni is quite interesting in that it is the same as the main temple building in Angkor. If you look at this aerial view of Angkor Wat, you can see the outer and inner walls, gates, buildings, all in the same layout. The 5 main towers at Angkor Wat and the 5 innermost lingas here are meant to represent the 5 peaks of Mount Meru. The difference, of course, is their orientation. As a Vishnu temple, Angkor Wat is oriented west. As a Shiva linga, the bottleneck here is oriented north. This is another carving of Shiva and Uma on Nandi. The 2 larger attendants to the bowl, I suppose, in front are thought to be Kartikeya and Ganesha, their first 2 sons. I don't know, do you see an elephant trunk? I'm not sure I do. I'd have to go back and take a better look at this. According to Bulbe, along with the shapeless frog that's coming next, this was the only sculpture the local villagers knew about because the place had been so overgrown for so many years. They actually called it Rupatan or
sculpted forms with magical power. They did not want to clear it. They did not want to clean it. They did not want to worship there. They did not want to meet any hermits living there. They did not want to walk through there for any reason. They purposefully avoided it. And this frog is quite famous. The frog sits right at the top of a waterfall to the lower part of the carved section. As I mentioned before, the inscriptions on the site primarily document the construction and dedication of the various monuments to the Hindu god Shiva and attribute different sculptures to either of the two kings. The inscriptions are in small rock caves along the river. As I said before, I'll link to Claude Jacques' paper below. But to give you a sense of the style of the text here, it is not poetic in the least. Here is a translation of one inscription. In 980 Saka, on the 14th day of the dark fortnight of Palguna, a Tuesday, His Majesty Monsignor Sri Udayaditya Varman Deva went to the precincts of the capital to the east in order to grant Mount Vran to the ascetics of the Vra Villa in the presence of Monsignor the Crown Prince and the four masters of assemblies in the presence of all the army chiefs, starting with Monsignor of Kbal and the four chiefs of the Ranvin and of all the servants, etc., etc. There are some prayers, mostly simple invocations like, I personally bow to Shiva, the one who is celebrated as the Hansa. Thus say those who know reality. Salute. That's repeated a couple of times. There are some simple Om Hail Shivas. Probably the most floral line reads, Torrent of Rudra, river of Shiva, this Ganga has manifested itself visibly noisy, she who completely destroys the faults of the world, like the celestial river. There's also lots of discussion about Nandi. Quote, Nandin shines, who delights Paramesa, brilliant, he by whose light the mass of darkness has been destroyed, who has the form of a linga on earth in order to give siddhi, he stands in the sky all powerful. Having condensed the ardor, having the splendor of myriads of suns he stands, giving water obtained by falling, eminent on the top of the mountain, the source, flowing with Mahendra Parvata, shining in the middle of the sun of Sambhu, it shines. Oh, although accomplished, those noble seekers of reality, famous for obtaining realization, stand on this mountain known as the mountain of Nandin. For the sake of realization, salute these Muni. End quote. And there are various other poems they believe were written by the ascetics the mountain was dedicated to that have just faded over time beyond legibility. Another reason Jacques proposed the inscriptions were so difficult to read is that they were clearly not the work of professional stonecutters. It was likely the hermits themselves who carved this stuff. So there are many different mistakes, misspellings, omissions, sentences that went on too long and go outside their frames or had to be split between two rocks. Some is Sanskrit, some is Khmer, all that stuff. Of course, as they do, there is a little place set up still for people to worship here. Where can I learn more? The seminal texts on this site are in French. I have linked them in the description box below. I am translating just the sections on Kbal Spean, and I will post a video of my translation into English. When that is ready, I will also link to it in my description box below and in a pinned comment. Looking through Jean Boubet's photographs taken around April 1968, I noticed many carvings that I did not spot on my visit. At first, I didn't know why. I thought maybe my guide was in a rush and didn't show me some things, or there was too much water flowing in November for me to see or photograph them, or they've been eroded, stolen, vandalized, I don't know. Upon reading Boubet's 1973 paper, I realized that these are almost always underwater and barely visible, and that he actually roughly dammed the river and drained the basins in order to photograph them in March 1968. So if you're curious about what you can't see or can only partially see because it's underwater, this is it. Boubet calls this the upstream wall of basin number 4. When I was there, I genuinely didn't notice any basins. I've heard it said that these were bathing spots favored by Jayavarman VII, the famous leper king, who ruled for almost 40 years from 1181 to 1218, so beginning about 100 years after Kbal Spean was mostly built. Obviously, he would bathe here in an effort to heal his skin. I don't know if the story is apocryphal or not because I can't find anything about
it. Also unclear to me is if this is true, were these already here or did Jayavarman the 7th have them made? At any rate, on the far wall, we can see an orant, which is the standard depiction of a Shivite hermit at Angkor. And of course, another Vishnu birthing Brahma. This is the downstream wall of basin number 4. Between the erosion and the old black and white photography, it's really difficult to make out what's happening here, but clearly another reclining Vishnu and many more ascetics. The same way Shiva rides Nandi, the goddess Ganga, the personification of the river Ganges, rides a crocodile. According to myth, Ganga was deeply in love with Shiva and wanted to marry him, but of course he was already married to Uma. Upon Uma's death, Ganga proposed to Shiva, but he told her he could never think of anyone else as his wife after Uma, but she would remain pure for eternity and indeed become the goddess of purity, in whose presence all sins and negative karma would be washed away. This is why Hindus bathe in the Ganges River. The notion that this is Ganga and her crocodile is further supported by how she is placed next to Vishnu. There are various tales about the birth of Ganga, but many of them revolve around her being born at the feet of Vishnu from the sweat of his foot, or when he poked a hole in the universe with his toenail, or when Brahma was washing his feet. In another of these stories, Indira, king of the gods, steals a horse and ties it up near sage Kapila's, that's right, the skull-bearing sage's ashram, while the sage was meditating in the deep forest. A human king, Sagar, the ruler of Ayodhya and ancestor of Rama, found the horse, assumed sage Kapila had stolen it, started rebuking the sage, who, his meditation interrupted, became furious, and with the yogic fire of his eyes, burnt all the complaining princes into ashes. Far away, their father asked where they were. And eventually the search ended in front of the horse, Sage Copula, and the pile of ashes. When the sage explained what happened, I think this is a twist in Western morality. He was not expected to apologize to the king. Rather, the king was expected to apologize to him. The king directed Anushman, the one who came upon the scene and figured out what was going on, to bring holy Ganga to earth, as only she could help them wash away the sin and attain salvation. Bhagirata, who is a source or tributary river to the Ganges in India, but personified, is the grandson or third generation of penance to the sage, eventually pleased Brahma enough that permission was granted to bring Ganga to earth. She was insulted at the thought of descending to the mortal realm and decided to flood it and wash away everything. To protect Earth, Shiva caught Ganga in his matted hair and held her there for a year. After one more year of penance from Bhagirata, Ganga was released, now understanding and respecting the power of Lord Shiva and asking for his forgiveness. Shiva initially released Ganga as 7 streams, but one of them flooded a hermitage, and the sage there became extremely angry and, using his yogic power, drank the whole Ganga. Again, Bhagirata pled for the sage's forgiveness, and he released Ganga from his thigh by cutting it, whence Ganga filled Earth's oceans and touched the ashes of the 60,000 ancestors of Bhagirata, blessing them in order that they attain eternal rest in heaven. The story is obviously quite apropos for Kbal Spean, geographically speaking, and because it's a hermitage. Perhaps this is what's depicted by the really eroded figures. Pure conjecture. Of course, as per usual, there's another post-Hinduism local legend about the woman holding the crocodile. Some think she is the Princess Crystal of the 7 Colors, a daughter of Jayavarman VII, resident at Angkor Thom, and her followers. This story is common in Koktanot village and other villages which were populated by the ethnic minority Khmer people who had migrated from Surin in Thailand. In one version of the story, the princess has the crocodile from birth, from when it was an egg. In another story, a monk raises the crocodile, but eventually the crocodile is requested by the princess as a pet. Either way, it ends up as the princess's pet at Angkor Thom, living in the Western Beret. In the version where the crocodile was raised by the monk, it gets lonely and wants to go back to the monk, but the princess tries to swim after it, so the crocodile swallows her for safekeeping, not realizing she would die on the way back to the monk. In the other version of the story, it's a simple accident. Either way, once the princess was swallowed, the king's armies chased the crocodile down the river, freaking it out. And today, the names of different villages situated from the south of the Western Beret down to Tonle Sap reflect the pursuit of the crocodile as it moved from one place to another. This reflects the low regard for crocodiles in contemporaneous Theravada Buddhism, where they symbolize destructive desires that can lead to suffering and downfall, and are typically the antagonists or villains in any Buddhist folktales in which they appear. He calls this a view of basin number 5 from the northwest, the downstream wall of basin number 5, the upstream wall of basin number 5. In the Basin 5 carving, the lotus that Brahma is born out of is coming from Vishnu's navel rather than Vishnu's back. And stylistically, we do see an evolution in the carving, which lends some credibility to the idea that these were made by or for Jayavarman VII a bit later than the others. This picture I just found difficult to reconcile with what I saw. Bulbe calls this, quote, linga carved on the ledge separating the two downstream reaches of the carved river, end quote. I found myself wondering if it's possible I only saw one branch of the river and not both. Here's yet another naissance de Brahma, or to my eyes anyway, what looks like 3 births of Brahma sculpted on the bed of what Bulbe calls the intermediate reach. And this I think I did see, but it did have a lot of water flowing over it. This photo I found not in his 1973 paper, but on his In Memoriam Facebook page, which I believe is run by his grandson. Bulbe passed away in 2007. This is supposedly near Kbal Spean in 1967 or maybe 1968. I did not see this. I'd love to see this. Where is it? Does it still exist? Hopefully this video has made you better prepared and more intrepid than I was, and you can show these to your guide and see if they know where they are. I keep saying one interesting thing. There are many interesting things about this site. Another interesting thing about Kbal Spean is that unlike other sites near Angkor, which were discovered and studied by the French as early as the mid-19th century, no academicians were aware of this place until February 1968, when Jean Boubet, an ethnologist who had been living among and studying the local Khmer for about 5 years, was introduced to it by a local shaman. The story is charming. To quote Danny Blau, Bulbe's grandson, translation mine, quote, one day after reconciling a broken couple, he treated the wife, who was sick with dengue fever, with quinine. He could take glory from it. However, he did nothing and went to see the village sorcerer, whom he advised to use his medicine. There she was, cured. Jean Boubet was right. He allowed the sorcerer to retain all his authority. To thank him, the sorcerer decided to reveal a secret to him. I know that you love our people, and I want to give you a gift. Go to the mountain of Kbal Spean. It is a place that is cursed. No one dares to venture there, but the gods will be merciful to you. I know that you're interested in old stones. Find the hermitage under the frog waterfall. Jean Boubet complies. He goes to the place. It is the river that waters Angkor. He discovers it entirely sculpted over nearly 200 meters. Waterfalls, basins, natural bridges, everything has been decorated, one could say illuminated, by the Angkorian hermits, end quote. I've also linked below to the blog Blau dedicated to his grandfather's work. And here he is, Jean Boubet in the 70s. Of all the available photos, I chose this one because it made me laugh. In Southeast Asia, we all know this French guy. Shirtless, on a motorcycle, cruising the locals. I hope this video was interesting and helpful for you in understanding Kbal Spean. Don't forget to check back for Jean Boubet's 1968 guide to the site. My translation is coming shortly with all of his original maps and photos. See you next time.